He couldn't breathe. She couldn't escape. They never knew his name. Until it was too late for the monster. 3 a.m. Hospital corridor. A 6-year-old boy with bare feet walking toward the most dangerous man in the city. "My sister says you kill monsters." 5 words, spoken with practiced precision. 5 words that would end one life and save 2 others. Grant Mercer had killed before, without hesitation, without remorse. But he'd never been asked by a child. The boy handed him a drawing, crayon strokes showing a figure labeled Monster Killer. "I'm Logan." His toes curled in patterns. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. A coping mechanism, a way to count threats through walls. Then she appeared. Logan's sister, Tessa, exhausted, terrified, bruised. The shadow along her jaw told Grant everything Logan hadn't said. "I'm sorry," she whispered, stepping between them, protecting her brother from the monster he'd just asked for help. Logan looked up at Grant with absolute trust. "Thank you for being a monster killer." Then he disappeared, bare feet silent on cold floor. Like hope, like faith, like a child who believed monsters could be defeated. Grant pulled out his phone, texted his fixer. "Need a background check. Dylan Pierce. I need to know where he is at all times." What happened next changed everything. Let me take you back to how this night began. The children's hospital corridor stretched endlessly under flickering fluorescent lights. Each buzz a metronome counting seconds that felt like hours. Grant Mercer stood motionless outside the surgical wing, his tailored charcoal suit incongruous against sterile white walls. Hands buried deep in pockets to prevent them from forming fists. At 2:43 a.m, the hallway belonged to ghosts and desperate prayers, to families suspended between before and after. A nurse passed without meeting his gaze, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking against linoleum in rhythmic intervals that measured distance rather than time. His niece Molly had been in surgery for 4 hours. What should have been routine had become critical when her small heart decided complications were more interesting than cooperation. The surgeon's carefully neutral expression before disappearing behind double doors had communicated more than any words could. Grant had orchestrated executions with less anxiety than this waiting. The sound reached him before the vision did. Bare feet padding against cold floor with determined purpose rather than aimless wandering. A small figure emerged from the shadowed alcove near the nursing station, trailing behind him nothing but courage and a white t-shirt 2 sizes too large. If this story touches your heart even a little, go ahead and subscribe. Join our family of hope and love, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. What Grant didn't know was that this child had been searching for him specifically. Logan Pierce had a mission, and Grant Mercer was the only person who could complete it. The boy moved with peculiar confidence for someone so young, as though the darkness held no mysteries he hadn't already cataloged and categorized by threat level. Grant registered details automatically. Approximately 6 years old. Curly hair wild with sleep or neglect. White shirt suggesting hand-me-downs or a sister's hurried dressing. Eyes that tracked movement with the hyper-awareness of prey animals who'd survived too many hunts. The hospital's heating system hummed through overhead vents, pushing stale air that carried antiseptic undertones mixed with something sweeter. The artificial fragrance meant to mask illness, but only emphasized it. Grant had stopped noticing these details years ago, trained himself to filter environmental noise until only threats registered. But the boy's appearance had sharpened his awareness, made him catalog everything with fresh intensity. A phone rang somewhere down the corridor. Shrill intrusion that went unanswered for 7 rings before someone finally silenced it. The sound emphasized the emptiness of this wing during graveyard hours. The skeleton crew stretched thin across too many floors. Grant wondered how often this child wandered these halls, how many nurses recognized him as regular fixture, rather than concerning anomaly. The boy's shoes, or lack thereof, bothered Grant more than it should have. Hospital floors weren't just cold, but collected everything. Germs and fluids that no amount of cleaning could fully eliminate. That this child navigated them barefoot spoke to either remarkable constitution or dangerous exposure that would eventually catch up with him. Someone had failed this boy. Multiple someones, probably. Grant's phone buzzed in his pocket. Undoubtedly an update about Molly's surgery, but he didn't reach for it. Something about this moment felt suspended, important in a way he couldn't articulate, as though responding to the notification would shatter the fragile connection forming between him and this strange child who approached monsters without flinching. The boy had learned different lessons about danger than most children. The child stopped directly in front of him without hesitation, without the usual wariness children exhibited when confronting strange adults in empty corridors. No polite distance, no shy glances seeking permission to speak. This boy had learned different lessons about safety. "My sister says you kill monsters," the child announced, his voice carrying clearly despite its small size. Each word enunciated with careful precision that suggested he'd practiced this speech. Rehearsed it. Prepared for this exact moment. Logan had no idea that asking Grant for help would set off a chain of events that would end with blood on a dark street. But first, Grant had to understand exactly what kind of monster he was being asked to kill. There was no question in the statement, no tremor of fear or excitement. Simply presentation of fact requiring acknowledgement. Grant felt something cold settle beneath his ribs. Recognition of truth delivered through an innocent mouth. The kind of truth that couldn't be unsaid, couldn't be walked back, couldn't be explained away with adult platitudes about misunderstanding. The boy tilted his head slightly, studying Grant's face with intensity that belonged in interrogation rooms rather than pediatric wards. His toes curled against the cold floor in rhythmic patterns. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The only visible indicator of vulnerability beneath practiced composure. Grant saw himself at that age. Saw every child who learned too early that monsters wore human faces and sat at dinner tables and called themselves family. The ICU door beside them remained closed, its small window revealing nothing but darkness punctuated by blinking machinery lights. Grant's eyes slid away from the boy's unwavering stare, found refuge in studying that impenetrable barrier between corridor and crisis. His jaw tightened imperceptibly. Muscle memory of suppressing reactions that could be interpreted as weakness. The hospital's recycled air suddenly felt insufficient. Each breath requiring conscious effort. Sometimes, Grant heard himself say, the word emerging rougher than intended. Scraped raw from somewhere beneath his carefully maintained exterior. He had built an empire on decisive action, on eliminating threats with surgical precision that surgeons envied. Yet this child's simple declaration stripped away years of calculated distance, left him standing in a hospital corridor at 3 a.m, exposed as exactly what he was. A killer. A monster. The thing mothers warned their children about. Except this child wasn't being warned away. This child was asking for help. The boy nodded once, satisfied with an answer that would have horrified most adults, then reached into his pocket with deliberate slowness. He produced a folded piece of paper, edges soft from repeated handling, and extended it toward Grant without looking away. Grant accepted it automatically, his fingers noting the warmth transferred from small hand to his own cold skin. The paper felt like absolution he hadn't earned, like responsibility he hadn't asked for, like purpose he'd stopped believing existed for men like him. The drawing revealed itself in simple crayon strokes. A tall figure with dark hair standing between a woman and child, arms spread wide against scribbled darkness. Above the protective figure, the boy had written in uneven letters that slanted upward with hope. Monster killer. The crayon had pressed hard enough to leave impressions on the reverse side. Evidence of conviction in every stroke. Evidence of faith in something Grant wasn't sure he could be. I'm Logan, the child said, still watching Grant's face for reactions he had clearly learned to interpret long before he should have needed such skills. His bare feet shifted slightly on cold floor, toes resuming their four-count pattern that Grant now recognized as self-soothing rather than nervous habit. A coping mechanism. A survival technique. Before Grant could formulate a response, before he could explain that monsters don't save people, they destroy them, hurried footsteps echoed from the nursing station direction, accompanied by a breathless apology already forming on approaching lips. Logan! God, Logan, I'm so sorry! The woman who appeared next would show Grant exactly why a 6-year-old boy had learned to identify monsters. What Grant saw on her face would seal Dylan Pierce's fate. A woman appeared, moving with the exhausted urgency of someone who'd been running on fumes for too long. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her dark hair escaping its bun, her face carrying the particular exhaustion that came from fighting battles on multiple fronts with inadequate ammunition. But it was her eyes that stopped Grant cold. The same eyes as the boy. The same hyper-awareness. The same learned wariness beneath forced calm. And beneath the fluorescent lights that hid nothing, Grant saw what she'd tried to conceal. The shadow of a bruise along her jaw, carefully covered with makeup that had worn thin over a 14-hour shift. The way she moved, efficient but careful, as though sudden movements might trigger consequences. The sister, Tessa. She reached for Logan with hands that trembled slightly, checking him over with practiced efficiency that spoke of too many nights exactly like this one. I'm sorry, she said again, this time directing the apology at Grant. He got away from me. I was just... Her voice cracked slightly. My patient coded and I couldn't... It's fine, Grant heard himself say, his voice carrying an authority that made her stop, made her really look at him for the first time. Recognition flickered across her face, not of Grant specifically, but of what he represented. The expensive suit, the predatory stillness, the particular quality of danger that marked men in his profession. She stepped between Grant and Logan instinctively, a human shield with nothing but exhaustion and determination, protecting her brother from the monster he'd just asked for help. The irony wasn't lost on Grant. Logan, she said softly, not taking her eyes off Grant. Go back to the waiting room. Now. But Tessa. Now. Logan hesitated. His small hand still clutching the crayon drawing Grant hadn't realized he was still holding. Then the boy did something that would replay in Grant's mind for weeks afterward. He looked up at Grant with absolute trust, the kind of trust that could destroy a man or remake him, and smiled. Thank you for being a monster killer, Logan said simply. Then he turned and padded back down the hallway, bare feet making no sound at all, disappearing into the shadows near the nursing station like he'd never existed. Like a ghost. Like hope. Tessa watched him go, her shoulders sagging with relief and something else. Resignation, maybe. The knowledge that this moment would repeat itself. That her brother would keep seeking protection from dangerous men because the most dangerous man in his life was supposed to be protecting him. I'm sorry, she said for the third time, still not looking at Grant directly. He's been through a lot. He doesn't understand. He understands perfectly, Grant interrupted, his voice harder than he intended. Tessa's eyes finally met his. And in that look, Grant saw everything Logan hadn't said. Every bruise hidden beneath long sleeves. Every night listening to footsteps approach their bedroom door. Every morning pretending everything was fine while cataloging new injuries. Every moment of survival in a war zone disguised as a home. What Tessa didn't know was that Grant had already made his decision. By morning, Dylan Pierce would be on a list. The kind of list people didn't survive. Your patient, Grant said, changing the subject with the practiced ease of a man who conducted interrogations without asking direct questions. Did they make it? Tessa blinked, thrown by the shift. Yes. Stabilized. Good. Silence stretched between them, heavy with questions neither was ready to ask. Grant should walk away. Should return to his vigil outside Molly's surgery. Should forget about the boy with bare feet and unwavering faith in monsters. Should. But Grant Mercer hadn't built an empire by doing what he should. Your brother, he said carefully, is very observant. Tessa's jaw tightened. He sees things he shouldn't. And says things that are true. Her eyes widened slightly, understanding dawning, fear following close behind. I don't know what he told you, she started, but Grant raised one hand, a gesture that commanded silence in boardrooms and basements alike. He didn't tell me anything I didn't already see, Grant said, his eyes dropping deliberately to the shadow along her jaw, then back to her face. Question is, what are you going to do about it? That's none of your business. It wasn't. Grant folded Logan's drawing carefully, tucking it into his inner jacket pocket where it rested against his heart. But your brother made it my business. He's 6 years old. He doesn't understand. He understands that monsters need killing. Grant's voice dropped to something cold and final. And he's not wrong. Tessa opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Grant could see the war behind her eyes. The desperate need for help battling against years of learning that help came with strings attached, that protection meant different kinds of cages, that trusting dangerous men led to darker places than where she already lived. I need to get back to work, she said finally, the deflection weak but practiced. You need to get your brother some shoes. She looked down the hallway where Logan had disappeared. He kicks them off. I've tried. Then get him socks. The floors here are filthy. It was perhaps the most mundane piece of advice Grant had ever given. The least threatening. The most obviously caring in a way that had nothing to do with his reputation or power, or the violence he could bring to bear. And it shattered something in Tessa's carefully maintained composure. Her eyes filled with tears she couldn't afford to shed. Not here, not in front of a stranger, not when she still had 6 hours left on her shift and a brother to protect, and a monster waiting at home who would smell weakness like blood in the water. Thank you, she whispered, the words barely audible. Then she was gone, hurrying back toward the nursing station, back to patients who needed her, back to the life she'd built out of survival and stubbornness and fierce love for a boy who deserved better than what the universe had dealt him. Grant stood alone in the corridor once more, the fluorescent lights buzzing their endless song, the antiseptic air conditioning humming its mechanical lullaby. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Molly's stable, his brother's voice said without preamble. Out of surgery. They're moving her to recovery. Good. You sound weird. You okay? Grant looked down at the crayon drawing visible through the thin fabric of his pocket, at the fierce scrawl that declared him something he'd never believed he could be. Monster killer. Yeah, he said slowly. I think I might be. He ended the call before his brother could ask questions Grant didn't have answers for. Not yet. But standing in that empty corridor at 3:17 in the morning, Grant Mercer was about to make a phone call that would set everything in motion. What he didn't know was that Dylan Pierce had already crossed a line that made him impossible to save. But standing in that empty corridor at 3:17 in the morning, Grant Mercer made a decision that would change 3 lives irrevocably. He pulled out his phone again and sent a single text to Rhett, his fixer. The man who found information, who solved problems, who asked no questions and left no traces. The text was simple. Need a background check. Dylan Pierce. And I need to know where he is at all times. The response came back within seconds. On it. Grant pocketed his phone and started walking toward recovery, toward his niece, toward the life he'd temporarily stepped away from when a boy with bare feet and unwavering faith had declared him capable of killing monsters. But he knew, with the cold certainty of a man who'd ended lives without hesitation, that he would be back. Because Logan Pierce had given him something more dangerous than any weapon, more binding than any oath, more powerful than any empire. Logan had given him purpose, and Grant Mercer had never failed to deliver on a promise, spoken or otherwise. The monsters didn't know it yet, but their days were numbered. 3 days after Logan Pierce declared Grant Mercer a monster killer, Molly was discharged with instructions for bed rest and a prescription for antibiotics that cost more than most people's rent. Grant carried her to the car himself, ignoring the wheelchair protocol, ignoring the nurses' protests, ignoring everything except the weight of his niece in his arms and the knowledge that she was alive. His brother stood by the passenger door, face haggard from days of sleeping in waiting room chairs and drinking coffee that tasted like regret. "Thank you," Marcus said, the words inadequate but sincere. Grant nodded once. Words had never been his currency. Action was. Grant thought he was returning to the hospital to check on his niece. He had no idea he was about to walk back into Logan's life at the exact moment the boy needed him most. He returned to the hospital that evening anyway, drawn by something he couldn't name and wouldn't have admitted under torture. The pediatric wing glowed with the particular fluorescence of institutional care, all harsh angles and chemical cleanliness that failed to mask the underlying scent of illness and fear. Logan was there, of course, curled in a chair 3 sizes too large, bare feet tucked beneath him despite the socks Grant had given him 3 nights prior, already worn thin at the heels from constant use. The boy's eyes tracked every person who passed with the vigilance of a sentry on hostile ground. He spotted Grant before Grant had fully entered the corridor, his small body tensing in recognition before relaxing into something that looked dangerously close to relief. That response, fear followed by recognition followed by safety, told Grant everything he needed to know about Logan's daily existence. "You came back," Logan said when Grant stopped in front of him. Not a question. An observation delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd learned to expect disappointment, but was occasionally surprised by its absence. "I came back. My sister is working." Logan gestured vaguely toward the nursing station where Tessa moved between patients with efficient exhaustion. "She works a lot." Grant studied the boy properly this time, cataloging details he'd missed in their first encounter. The way Logan's shoulders hunched slightly inward, making himself smaller. The careful placement of his hands in his lap, palms down. Fingers curled just enough to hide torn cuticles that spoke of nervous habits and stress beyond his years. "Did you come back for me?" Logan asked, that devastating directness cutting through Grant's observations. The question should have given Grant an exit strategy, a way to deflect and retreat into the comfortable distance he maintained between himself and human connection. Instead, he found himself sinking into the chair beside Logan's, his expensive suit protesting the institutional furniture. "Yeah," he admitted. "I came back for you." Logan's face transformed. Not into a smile exactly, but into something softer. Something that suggested he'd been waiting his whole 6 years for someone to choose him deliberately, specifically, without being obligated by blood or duty. They sat in silence, the comfortable kind that didn't demand filling. The overhead lights hummed their endless mechanical song, marking time in fluorescent intervals. "Your niece," Logan said eventually. "Is she okay?" "She will be." "That's good." Logan pulled his knees up, resting his chin on them. "My sister worries about you." "Why?" "Because you look at her like you can see things she's hiding." Logan's voice dropped to conspiratorial whisper. "And because she's scared of what you might do if you see too much." Grant recognized the warning for what it was. Logan was protecting his sister the only way he knew how, by managing information flow, by controlling the narrative, by keeping dangerous pieces separated. A 6-year-old shouldn't know how to play chess with human relationships. "I'm not going to hurt your sister," Grant said. "I know." Logan's certainty was absolute. You kill monsters. You don't make them. The distinction, delivered with such simple faith, settled somewhere beneath Grant's ribs where the cold thing lived, where emotion had frozen years ago, preserved in ice like evidence of a life he'd abandoned. "Sometimes," Grant said slowly, "killing monsters makes you one." Logan considered this seriously. Then he reached out and placed his small hand on Grant's arm, the gesture carrying more courage than most men mustered in their entire lives. "My teacher says monsters hurt people who can't fight back." Logan's voice was steady, certain, devastating. "You hurt people who hurt other people. That's different." And something in the ice cracked, just slightly, just enough to let warmth seep through. "Yeah," Grant said, his voice rougher than intended. "That's different." What Grant didn't know was that he was about to drive Tessa and Logan home and see firsthand the neighborhood where Dylan's control was absolute. The address alone would tell Grant everything he needed to know about how trapped they really were. Tessa Pierce finished her shift at 6:47 a.m., 17 minutes past when her replacement should have clocked in. The delay meant missing the early bus, which meant walking 3 blocks in November cold with a jacket too thin and exhaustion too heavy. She found Logan exactly where she'd left him 8 hours ago, curled in the waiting room chair with Grant Mercer sitting beside him like a well-dressed sentinel. Her brother was asleep, head resting against Grant's shoulder with the unconscious trust of a child who'd found something safe to lean against. Grant's eyes met hers over Logan's curls. No judgment in that gaze, but something worse. Understanding. The kind that stripped away carefully constructed lies and saw straight through to the bruised truth beneath. "He fell asleep about an hour ago," Grant said quietly, his voice pitched low to avoid waking Logan. "Didn't want to move him." Tessa's throat tightened. Strangers didn't do this. Didn't sit for hours with other people's children. Didn't let them sleep on expensive suits. Didn't look at exhausted sisters with eyes that promised protection without demanding payment. Strangers, especially dangerous ones, always wanted something. "Thank you," she managed, moving closer. "Logan, baby, time to go." Logan stirred, blinking awake with the instant alertness of someone who'd learned that sleep was a luxury that could be interrupted violently. His eyes found Grant first, relaxing when he confirmed the source of warmth against his cheek. Then he looked up at Tessa. "Tessa," he said, his voice carrying that particular quality of a child about to share important news. "Grant came back. He said he came back for me." The simple joy in that statement broke something in Tessa's chest. Her brother, who'd learned not to expect much from adults, who'd learned that promises were made to be broken, was glowing with the revelation that someone had chosen him. "That's nice, baby." She held out her hand. "But we need to get home. Dylan will be—" She caught herself, but not fast enough. Grant's eyes sharpened, cataloging the slip. The fear that flickered across her face before she could suppress it. "Dylan will be wondering where you are," he finished for her, his voice carefully neutral in a way that made it anything but. "He's Tessa's boyfriend," Logan offered, his earlier joy dimming. "He doesn't like when we're late." The clinical description, factual, emotionless, said more than any dramatic accusation could have. This was Logan's normal. But Grant was about to discover that Dylan's violence wasn't just emotional. It was strategic, calculated, and far more dangerous than a simple temper. The clinical description, factual, emotionless, said more than any dramatic accusation could have. This was Logan's normal. Dylan's displeasure was weather to be endured, patterns to be predicted, storms to be survived. Tessa's hand closed around Logan's. perhaps tighter than necessary. We really need to go. But Grant stood, unfolding from the chair with predatory grace that reminded Tessa exactly what he was. Not a helpful stranger. Not a kind man sitting with a lonely child. A mafia boss who'd somehow decided her brother mattered. Which meant she mattered. Which meant Dylan might matter soon, too. And that terrified her more than Dylan's fists ever had. "Let me drive you," Grant said. Not a question, not quite a command, but somewhere in between. The voice of a man accustomed to having his offers accepted. "That's not necessary. It's 6 blocks to the bus stop. It's 34 degrees outside. Your jacket has a broken zipper." Grant's eyes dropped deliberately to her collar, where she'd tried to hide the tear. "And your brother is half asleep." All facts. All impossible to argue against without revealing that her resistance had nothing to do with inconvenience, and everything to do with the address she didn't want him to know. The apartment she didn't want him to see. The life she didn't want him to document. "Please," Logan said, looking up at Tessa with those eyes that destroyed her daily. "I'm really tired." She'd taught him to never get in cars with strangers, had drilled it into him alongside "don't talk to people you don't know," and if someone makes you uncomfortable, scream and run. But Logan wasn't uncomfortable. Logan was hopeful in a way that made Tessa's throat close with unshed tears. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Just this once." Grant's car was the kind that cost more than Tessa would make in 5 years. Black, expensive, with leather seats that had never known stains and climate control that banished November with the push of a button. Logan climbed into the back without hesitation, buckling himself in with practiced efficiency. Tessa sat in the passenger seat, hands folded in her lap, acutely aware of her wrinkled scrubs and the coffee stain on her shoulder, and the fact that she probably smelled like the hospital, no matter how many times she washed her hands. "Where to?" Grant asked, pulling out of the parking garage with the smooth confidence of someone who'd never worried about parking tickets, or gas prices, or whether his car would start. Tessa gave him the address, watching his face for reaction. The neighborhood was rough, the kind where sirens were ambient noise and graffiti was art, and people minded their business because getting involved led to problems. Grant's expression didn't change. He simply nodded and pulled into traffic. The drive took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of Logan chattering about his teacher and a book he was reading and whether Grant liked pizza. 12 minutes of Tessa sitting silent, cataloging exit strategies and trying not to notice the way Grant listened to her brother with genuine attention. When they pulled up to the apartment building, paint peeling, security door broken, trash scattered across the sidewalk, Grant's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is it," Tessa said, already reaching for the door handle. "Thank you for the ride." "Tessa," Grant's voice stopped her. "The bruise on your jaw is from a right hook. The way you move your shoulders suggests old injury that never healed properly. And Logan counts footsteps in patterns of 4 because he's learned to track movement through walls." Tessa's breath stopped. Everything stopped. "I'm not saying this to scare you," Grant continued, his voice gentle in a way that was somehow worse than accusation. "I'm saying it so you know that I see you. Both of you. And when you're ready, if you ever need anything, you have my number." He pulled a card from his jacket pocket, plain black with silver lettering. Just a phone number, nothing else. Tessa took it with trembling fingers, unable to form words around the fear and hope warring in her chest. "Come on, Logan," she managed finally. Logan unbuckled himself but paused before climbing out. "Will I see you again?" "Yeah," Grant said, and it sounded like a promise. "You'll see me again." As they walked up to the building, Tessa felt Grant's eyes on her back. Watching, cataloging, deciding. And for the first time in 3 years, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, monsters could be killed after all. 2 days later, Grant was about to discover something that would make his blood run cold. Logan's survival wasn't just about enduring Dylan's violence. It was about predicting it with military precision. What Grant was about to witness would transform this from a rescue mission into something far more urgent. Grant returned to the apartment building 2 days later, parking across the street with a clear view of the entrance. He'd been conducting surveillance for 18 years, on rivals, on traitors, on people who'd made the fatal mistake of thinking they could take what was his. This was different. This was watching a child walk home from school alone, scanning the sidewalk with hyper-vigilant awareness that no 6-year-old should possess. Logan moved like a soldier in a war zone. 3 steps, pause to scan. 4 steps, check over shoulder. Repeat. The pattern was so ingrained it appeared unconscious, muscle memory born from necessity. A group of teenagers passed on the opposite sidewalk. Logan's entire body tensed, his trajectory shifting to maximize distance while maintaining forward progress. He didn't run. Running attracted attention, indicated prey, but his pace increased just enough to be noticeable. Grant's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The boy reached the apartment building and stopped, his head tilting in that particular way that indicated listening. Counting, Grant realized. Logan was counting footsteps from inside the building, determining who was home and where they were positioned. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. The pattern meant something. Location, maybe. Or threat level. A code developed through years of surviving in a space that should have been sanctuary, but had become battlefield. Logan stood there for nearly a full minute, absolutely still, processing auditory information through walls and doors, and the distance between safety and danger. Then his small shoulders sagged slightly, and he entered the building. Grant waited, watched, timed it. What happened next revealed the full scope of Logan's nightmare. The boy wasn't going home. He was executing an escape plan, one he'd clearly used dozens of times before. 7 minutes later, Logan emerged from the building moving faster than before, his white t-shirt visible beneath an unzipped jacket. No bag, no explanation, just flight disguised as errand. The boy walked 2 blocks to a small convenience store, entering with the casual air of someone running mundane errands. Grant followed at a distance, watching through the window as Logan approached the counter with exact change, purchasing a single candy bar with the deliberate care of someone who'd counted pennies beforehand. But it wasn't about the candy bar. Logan spoke to the cashier, an elderly Korean woman who nodded and gestured toward the back room. The boy disappeared for 15 minutes, returning with slightly damp hands and a relieved expression. Public bathroom. Safety. A place where locked doors and public spaces provided temporary protection. Grant's jaw clenched as understanding crystallized. Logan wasn't running errands. He was escaping, creating distance, buying time before he had to return to whatever was waiting in that apartment. The boy exited the store and started the walk back, his pace slowing with each step like a condemned man approaching the gallows. His hands moved in patterns, touching his jacket zipper, counting the repetitions, 1, 2, 3, 4, the self-soothing mechanism barely keeping panic at bay. Grant had seen soldiers with that kind of trauma. Men who'd survived combat through hypervigilance and pattern recognition and the ability to predict violence before it landed. Men who jumped at sudden noises and slept with weapons and never truly relaxed because relaxation meant vulnerability. Logan was 6 years old. Grant pulled out his phone and texted Rhett. Need everything on Dylan Pierce. History, employment, patterns, especially police calls to his address. The response came within seconds. Already started. You're not going to like what I'm finding. Send it anyway. While Grant waited for the file, Logan was standing 3 doors from his apartment building, employing that same listening technique. What the boy heard would determine whether he walked into the apartment or ran. While he waited, Grant watched Logan stop 3 doors down from the apartment building, his small body rigid as he employed the same listening technique, counting footsteps, mapping movement, calculating risk. Whatever the boy heard must have been acceptable because he eventually entered the building, disappearing into the structure that should have protected him, but instead required military-grade situational awareness just to navigate safely. Grant's phone buzzed. A file from Rhett, already thick with documentation. Dylan Pierce, 29 years old, with a history that read like a greatest hits of red flags. 3 domestic violence complaints filed by previous girlfriends, all dropped before going to court. 2 assault charges that mysteriously disappeared. Neighbors at his current address had called police 7 times in the past year. Noise complaints, shouting, sounds of breaking furniture. Every call had been classified as domestic disturbance and noted as parties declined to press charges, which meant someone was scared. Someone was being convinced or coerced or threatened into silence, and Grant would bet everything he owned that the someone was Tessa, protecting herself and Logan the only way she knew how. By making herself invisible, by keeping authorities away, by surviving one day at a time. The file included photos. Dylan was average height, average build, average features. The kind of man who blended into crowds and flew under radar precisely because there was nothing distinctive about him. Nothing to remember. Nothing that screamed danger until it was too late. Grant scrolled through more documentation. Dylan worked construction, sporadic employment with long gaps suggesting temper issues or reliability problems. His social media was public, photos of him with friends at bars, comments that straddled the line between humor and aggression, likes on pages that celebrated masculine violence disguised as jokes. And there, buried in a Facebook album from 18 months ago, a photo of Dylan with Tessa. She was smiling, but the expression didn't reach her eyes, and her body language suggested careful distance despite his arm draped possessively across her shoulders. In the background of that photo, partially visible behind Tessa's legs, was a small boy with curly hair. Logan, maybe 4 years old, staring at the camera with the same wary awareness he carried now. Even then, the boy had known. Grant forwarded the file to his encrypted cloud, then deleted it from his phone. Rhett knew better than to keep copies. This information existed now only in Grant's possession and in his memory, cataloged and archived with the same precision he used for all operations. Because that's what this was becoming. An operation. A carefully planned intervention requiring intelligence gathering and strategic positioning and the elimination of a very specific threat. Grant had removed men from this world for less. Men who'd betrayed trusts or stolen property, or simply gotten in the way of business interests. He'd done it cleanly, efficiently, without losing sleep or second-guessing decisions. This would be different. This was personal in a way he hadn't allowed himself to care about anything in years. This was about a boy with bare feet and fearless eyes who'd walked up to a monster and asked for help. And Grant Mercer had never failed to deliver on a promise, spoken or otherwise. He started the car and pulled into traffic, already forming plans that would require careful timing and absolute precision. Dylan Pierce had no idea what was coming for him, but he would. Soon enough, the file Rhett was about to deliver would reveal something worse than Grant had imagined. Dylan Pierce wasn't just violent, he was a pattern offender who'd been perfecting his methods for over a decade, and the system had let him. Rhett delivered the expanded file in person, meeting Grant at a coffee shop that served as neutral ground for conversations that couldn't be recorded. The folder was thick with documentation, police reports, neighbor testimonies, employment records, social media archives. "You're not going to like this," Rhett said without preamble, sliding the folder across the table with careful precision that suggested distaste for its contents. Grant opened it, scanning pages that transformed his suspicions into documented fact. 7 police calls in 12 months. Neighbors reporting screaming, crying, the sound of furniture breaking at 2 a.m. One witness had seen Tessa leave the building with a black eye. Another had heard Logan crying for hours through paper-thin walls. Every report ended the same way. Victim declined to press charges. If you're watching this and you've ever seen someone trapped by a system that protects abusers instead of victims, go ahead and subscribe. Join our family of hope and love, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because Dylan Pierce represents every abuser who's learned to game the system. And this story is about what happens when someone finally makes them pay. The woman in 3C says it's gotten worse in the past 6 months, Rhett continued, his voice low enough to avoid carrying beyond their table. Dylan lost his construction job in April. Been drinking more, staying home more. She hears him yelling about money, about Tessa working too much, about the kid making too much noise. Grant's jaw tightened. Logan, who moved like a ghost through hospital corridors, who counted in careful patterns to minimize his presence. That child was being told he made too much noise. What else? Property manager says Dylan's name is on the lease. Tessa's isn't. Legally speaking, it's his apartment. If she leaves, she's got no claim to it. And her credit is shot from medical debt. Some emergency room visit 3 years ago that got sent to collections. She's trapped financially. The trap wasn't just physical. It was bureaucratic. Dylan had engineered a situation where leaving meant homelessness, where fighting back meant losing the only roof over Logan's head. This was control in its most insidious form. Grant absorbed this information with the clinical detachment of a man assessing tactical situations. Tessa couldn't leave because leaving meant homelessness. She couldn't press charges because Dylan controlled the housing. She worked endless shifts at the hospital because it was the only space where she had control, where she was valued, where her presence wasn't met with violence. The kids' school records show numerous absences, Rhett continued. Teachers' notes indicate concern about home situation, but nothing official was filed. Logan is reading 2 grade levels ahead, which suggests intelligence, but his socialization scores are concerning. Doesn't play with other children, hypervigilant, exhibits signs of trauma. Of course, Logan didn't play with other children. Play required letting your guard down, trusting your environment, believing that the world was safe enough to be enjoyed. Logan knew better. I want 24/7 surveillance on Dylan, Grant said. Patterns, habits, weak points, where he goes, who he sees, when he's home and when he's not. Already on it. Rhett pulled out a tablet, showing surveillance photos time-stamped from the past 48 hours. He leaves for the bar at 9 p.m. most nights, stays until close, walks home drunk, which is when the neighbors report the worst incidents. Tessa's shift ends at 7 a.m., so he's usually passed out when she gets back. The kid walks to school alone because Dylan's still sleeping. Grant studied the photos, memorizing face and build and the particular swagger of a man who'd never faced real consequences. Dylan was smaller than expected, maybe 5'10" and slim. He didn't rely on size to intimidate, which meant he was smarter than the average domestic abuser. More calculated, more dangerous in some ways. There's something else, Rhett said carefully. Dylan's got a sealed juvenile record. I'm working on getting details, but preliminary information suggests assault with intent. He put his high school girlfriend in the hospital when he was 17. Dylan Pierce had been practicing violence since he was a teenager. He'd learned early that the system would protect him, that victims wouldn't speak, that he could escalate with impunity. Grant was about to teach him that some patterns end permanently. Of course he did. Men like Dylan didn't wake up one day and decide to be violent. They practiced. They refined their techniques. They learned exactly how much damage they could cause while maintaining plausible deniability. I want him gone, Grant said, his voice carrying the particular quality that ended conversations and started operations. Rhett nodded, unsurprised. Permanent or temporary? Permanent, but clean. No connection to Tessa or the boy. And I want her protected during the transition. Housing, security, whatever she needs. Already pulled options. There's an apartment in a better neighborhood. Building with actual security. 2 bedrooms. Lease is month to month under a shell corporation. Untraceable to you. I can have it ready in 72 hours. This was why Grant paid Rhett more than most executives. The man anticipated needs before they were articulated, solved problems before they fully formed, and asked no unnecessary questions about moral implications. Do it. And Rhett? Grant's eyes met his fixer's steady gaze. This is priority 1. Everything else gets pushed. Understood. Rhett collected the folder, the tablet, every piece of physical evidence. For what it's worth, I've been doing this job for 15 years. Seen a lot of situations. This one's worth the resources. After Rhett left, Grant sat in the coffee shop for another 20 minutes, drinking espresso that had gone cold and staring at nothing while his mind organized details into operational plans. He'd removed obstacles before, had ended threats with the efficiency that came from years of practice and absolute certainty in his decisions. But those had been business decisions, calculated eliminations of people who existed in his world, who knew the rules and the risks, and had made choices that led to consequences. Dylan Pierce existed in a different world. Civilian. Civilian victims. Civilian collateral damage. Except Logan had made it Grant's world when he'd said those 5 words. My sister says you kill monsters. Grant pulled out his phone and sent a text to the number that connected directly to people who specialized in permanent solutions. Need a consultation. Priority 1. The response came within minutes. Thursday night. Usual place. 3 days. 3 days to finalize plans, to ensure every angle was covered. To make certain that when Dylan Pierce disappeared from Tessa and Logan's life, he disappeared completely. Grant finished his cold espresso and stood, leaving cash on the table that was twice what the drink cost. The waitress would pocket the difference and forget his face, which was exactly the point. Outside, November cold cut through his coat with knife-edge precision. Grant turned his collar up against it and started walking, his breath fogging in the air like the ghosts of every decision he'd ever made. Somewhere across town, Logan was probably home from school, probably employing his 4-count pattern to map danger through walls, probably trying to make himself invisible enough to survive another night. Not for much longer. Grant pulled out his phone to text Tessa. What he was about to offer would sound like charity, but it was actually the first move in an extraction that would end with Dylan's permanent removal. Grant pulled out his phone and texted Tessa from the number he'd given her. Coffee tomorrow? Just to talk. The response took 15 minutes, during which Grant imagined her staring at the message, weighing risks and benefits and the particular danger of trusting men who offered help. Finally, okay, 9 a.m. at Starbucks on 5th and Maple. I have a break then. I'll be there. Grant pocketed his phone and headed for his car, already mentally preparing for a conversation that would require delicacy he wasn't accustomed to employing. He couldn't tell Tessa about his plans. That would make her an accessory, would put her at risk legally and physically. But he could lay groundwork. Could offer alternatives. Could show her that exits existed even when she'd convinced herself she was trapped. The first rule of extraction operations. Make the asset believe escape is possible before attempting extraction. Tessa Pierce was about to learn that monsters could be killed. She just didn't know yet that the killing had already begun. The apartment building sat in a neighborhood that looked nothing like where Tessa and Logan had been living. Trees lined streets. Security cameras monitored entrances. The lobby had a doorman who actually stood at his post instead of smoking around the corner. I don't understand, Tessa said for the 3rd time, standing in the empty two-bedroom unit with sunlight streaming through windows that had actual screens and locks that worked. Why would you? I can't afford this. I can barely afford where we are now. Grant leaned against the kitchen counter, hands in his pockets, carefully maintaining the non-threatening posture he'd practiced for this moment. The rent is covered for 6 months. After that, we'll reassess. Covered by who? Grant was about to deliver the most important lie of his career. The charitable foundation didn't exist, but the escape route it represented was real. If Tessa accepted, Dylan would lose his primary weapon: control. A charitable foundation that helps women and children in difficult situations. Your name came up through the hospital's social services. They flagged your case. The lie was smooth, rehearsed, backed by documentation that Rhett had forged with the meticulous attention to detail that made him invaluable. There was a foundation. Grant had created it that morning through shell corporations and legitimate-looking paperwork. There were selection criteria that Tessa conveniently met. There was an escape route that looked like charity instead of intervention. Tessa walked through the apartment slowly, her fingers trailing along walls that had fresh paint, touching door frames that weren't splintered from fists or boots. Logan followed her like a shadow, his eyes wide with the kind of wonder that broke Grant's heart. "This bedroom is bigger than our whole apartment," Logan said, standing in what would be his room, spinning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It has a lock on the inside," Grant pointed out, watching Tessa's face when she registered that detail. "Both bedrooms do. And the main door has a deadbolt plus a chain lock." Tessa's hand drifted to her throat, an unconscious gesture that suggested she was calculating what those locks meant. Safety, privacy, the ability to keep monsters outside instead of sharing space with them. "There's a school 3 blocks away," Grant continued. "Better district, better test scores. Logan's records are already transferred. The foundation handled it. He can start Monday if you want." "Monday?" Tessa turned to face him, and Grant saw the war happening behind her eyes. The desperate desire to say yes, battling against years of learning that gifts came with strings, that help meant debt, that accepting aid from dangerous men led to darker cages. "The foundation covers moving costs too," Grant said. "Movers, packing materials, whatever you need. You call them, tell them when you want to move, and they handle everything." "And Dylan?" There it was. The real question. The reason Tessa had been trapped despite wanting to leave, despite knowing she should leave, despite lying awake at night planning escapes she never executed. Dylan. "You don't tell him," Grant said simply. "You pack when he's not there, you move when he's not there, and you leave a note that says you're done. The lease is in his name. You're not breaking any laws. You're just leaving. He'll find me. Not at this address. It's registered under the foundation's name, and the doorman has instructions not to give out resident information." Tessa looked at Logan, who was standing in the sunlight streaming through his potential bedroom window, his face tilted up like a flower seeking warmth. Her baby brother, who'd spent 6 years learning to survive instead of learning to live. "What do you get out of this?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant had expected the question, had prepared his answer with the same careful precision he used for all operations. "Nothing. The foundation operates independently. I'm just the messenger." "You're a mafia boss." "Yes. And I'm supposed to believe you're doing this out of the kindness of your heart?" Grant met her eyes with the unflinching directness that had intimidated everyone from rival bosses to federal prosecutors. "No. You're supposed to believe I'm doing this because your brother asked me to kill a monster, and this is how monsters get killed. Not with guns or violence, but by removing their power. Dylan's power is the apartment, the lease, the financial trap. Take that away, and he's just a man." A pathetic, violent man who you never have to see again. Tessa's breath caught. He'll come looking for us. Let him look. This building has security. The doorman has your photos and instructions. And if Dylan manages to get past all that, Grant's voice dropped to something cold and final. Then he deals with me. The promise hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that didn't need articulating. But what neither Tessa nor Logan knew was that Grant had no intention of letting Dylan get even close to that building. The threat would be eliminated long before Dylan could test the security. The promise hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that didn't need articulating. Tessa understood what Grant was offering, what he was capable of, what protection looked like from a man who'd built an empire on violence. Logan appeared in the doorway of his potential bedroom, his small face serious with the weight of a decision that shouldn't fall to 6-year-olds. "Tessa," he said quietly, "I want to live here. I want to go to the school that's 3 blocks away. I want a door that locks." Tessa's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Quiet, exhausted tears that came from years of holding everything together with nothing but determination and denial. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Grant pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Rhett. "Green light. Friday, 2 p.m. The response was immediate. "Confirmed." "The movers can be here Friday afternoon," Grant said. "Make a list of what you need to keep. They'll pack everything, transport it, even help you unpack if you want." "Friday?" Tessa's voice cracked. "That's 2 days from now." "Dylan works Friday afternoons, right? 3 to 11 shift?" She nodded slowly, understanding dawning. Grant had timed this deliberately. Dylan would come home Friday night to an empty apartment, a note, and no forwarding address. By then, Tessa and Logan would be here. Safe, protected, gone. "I need to think," Tessa said, but Grant could see she'd already decided. Could see the hope fighting through fear, could see her mentally planning what to pack and what to abandon and how to execute an escape she'd dreamed about for 3 years. "Take your time," Grant said, even though time was a luxury they didn't have. Even though every day Tessa stayed in that apartment was another day, Logan counted footsteps and developed trauma responses that would take years to unpack. They left the apartment together, Logan holding Tessa's hand tight enough to leave impressions, his eyes tracking back to the building like he was memorizing it, making sure it was real, making sure he could find his way back to the first safe place he'd seen in 6 years. Grant drove them home, to the apartment they'd be leaving in 48 hours, to the building where Dylan was probably already drinking and working himself into the rage that would explode when Tessa walked through the door. "Thank you," Tessa said when they pulled up to the curb. "I don't know why you're doing this, but thank you." Grant nodded once. Words weren't his currency. Action was. As they disappeared into the building, Grant sent another text to Rhett. "Status on secondary problem? Thursday night. All arrangements made. Confirmed." Grant pulled away from the curb and headed back toward the world he knew better than this one. The world of calculated violence and strategic elimination, and men who understood that sometimes the only way to kill a monster was to become one. But this time, he was becoming a monster for the right reasons. This time, there was a boy with bare feet who believed Grant was capable of something better than destruction. This time, Grant wasn't just ending a threat. He was creating safety. And that made all the difference. 3 months later, Grant would discover he hadn't just saved 2 lives. He'd accidentally built a family. But first, Tessa and Logan had to learn what safety actually felt like after years of survival. 3 months after Tessa and Logan moved into the apartment with locks that worked and sunlight that reached inside, Grant found himself sitting at their dinner table eating spaghetti that Tessa had made from scratch, while Logan showed him a math worksheet with a gold star at the top. Mrs. Henderson says I might skip a grade, Logan announced, his pride evident in the way he carefully smoothed the worksheet flat so Grant could see every problem solved correctly. She says I'm exceptionally gifted in numerical reasoning. That's impressive, Grant said, studying the work with genuine attention. The problems were complex for a 6-year-old. Multiplication, basic division, word problems that required multi-step logic. He's been reading at a 4th-grade level since he was 5, Tessa added from the kitchen, where she was stirring sauce with the relaxed posture of someone who no longer listened for footsteps or tracked threats through walls. Teacher thinks he's been hiding how smart he is, trying not to stand out. She didn't say why, didn't need to. They all understood that standing out in the previous apartment had meant becoming a target, meant drawing attention that led to consequences. Here, Logan could be brilliant, could raise his hand in class, could bring home gold stars without worrying that pride would be met with violence. The transformation over 3 months had been remarkable. Logan no longer counted in 4-beat patterns, no longer scanned exits compulsively, no longer flinched at raised voices from the apartment next door. He was learning what childhood looked like when it wasn't a survival exercise. I got you something, Grant said, pulling a wrapped package from his briefcase. For your good grades. Logan accepted it with the careful reverence he brought to all of Grant's gifts. The socks had been just the beginning. There had been books, a tablet for reading, a warm winter coat, new shoes that Logan actually kept on his feet because he no longer needed to be ready for flight. This gift was different. Logan unwrapped it slowly, revealing a box that contained a high-quality telescope, the kind designed for serious amateur astronomy. Tessa said you like looking at stars, Grant explained, watching the boy's face light up with wonder that no 6-year-old should have had to earn. I love it, Logan breathed, his small hands already figuring out how the pieces connected. Can we set it up tonight? On the balcony? After dinner, Tessa said, appearing with plates of spaghetti and a smile that Grant had learned to catalog as genuine. She'd gained weight over the past 3 months, her face filling out, her exhaustion easing into simple tiredness instead of bone-deep depletion. They ate together, conversation flowing easily around topics that would have seemed mundane to anyone else but felt revolutionary to Grant. Logan's upcoming field trip, Tessa's shift schedule, whether they should get a cat. Normal. This was what normal looked like. After dinner, Grant helped Logan set up the telescope on the narrow balcony while Tessa did dishes. The city lights polluted the sky, but Logan didn't care. He peered through the eyepiece with intense focus, tracking stars he'd apparently been studying in library books. That's Jupiter, he announced, adjusting the telescope slightly. You can see the bands if you look close. Grant looked, seeing the planet as a bright point with vague striations that could be atmospheric bands or could be his imagination. That's incredible, he said, and meant it. Logan was about to ask Grant a question that would change everything. The conversation on this balcony would force Grant to confront what he'd been avoiding for 3 months, his growing attachment to this family he'd accidentally created. Logan pulled back from the telescope, his expression serious. Tessa says you're the reason we live here, the reason Dylan doesn't know where we are. Grant hadn't expected directness from a child, but should have. Logan had never hidden behind childhood innocence, had never pretended not to understand the adult truths that shaped his world. The foundation is the reason, Grant said carefully. The foundation you made up. Logan's voice carried no judgment, just statement of fact. I heard you and Tessa talking last week. She knows there's no real foundation. She knows you paid for everything. Of course, Tessa had figured it out. She was smarter than Grant had given her credit for, had probably known from the beginning, but accepted the fiction because it gave her plausible deniability. Does that bother you? Grant asked. Logan considered the question with the seriousness he brought to all complex problems. I used to think monsters were things under my bed, Then I learned they sit at dinner tables. Then I learned they can be killed. He looked up at Grant with eyes too old for his face. Now I think monsters are just people who choose to hurt, and heroes are people who choose to stop them. The simplicity of it, the elegant moral framework from a child who'd survived what would have broken most adults, settled somewhere in Grant's chest where the ice had been thawing for 3 months. "Your sister worries I'm a bad influence," Grant said. "You taught me it's okay to be smart. You taught me locks are for keeping bad things out, not good things in. You taught me that when adults say they'll do something, sometimes they actually do it." Logan's small hand found Grant's. "Those are good influences." Inside, through the sliding glass door, Tessa watched them with an expression Grant couldn't quite read. Not fear anymore, not wariness. Something softer that he didn't have names for because he'd stopped believing such expressions could be directed at him. "I should go," Grant said, standing. "School night." "You could stay," Logan said quickly. "We could watch a movie." Tessa made popcorn. "Logan." Tessa appeared in the doorway, her voice carrying gentle warning. "Grant has work." "Actually," Grant heard himself say, "I don't. Movie sounds good." They ended up on the couch, Tessa on one end, Logan in the middle, Grant on the other, watching an animated film about a boy and a dragon that Logan had seen 3 times but insisted was Grant's cultural education. Halfway through, Logan fell asleep, his head on Tessa's lap, his feet stretched across to rest against Grant's leg. Neither adult moved, unwilling to disturb the peaceful weight of a child who'd learned to sleep without nightmares. "He hasn't had a bad dream in 6 weeks, Tessa said quietly, her hand stroking Logan's curls with unconscious affection. "Used to be every night, sometimes multiple times. He'd wake up screaming." Grant said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like taking credit for basic human decency. What Tessa was about to tell Grant would confirm what he'd suspected, that Dylan hadn't just disappeared on his own. She'd figured out what Grant had done. The question was whether she would thank him or fear him. "I know what you did," Tessa continued, her eyes still on the television but her voice pitched for confession. "With Dylan. I know he didn't just accept us leaving. I know there's a reason he hasn't come looking for us." Grant's expression didn't change. "Dylan made choices. Choices have consequences." "Is he dead?" "He's gone. That's all that matters." Tessa was silent for a long moment, processing implications she'd probably already guessed. Then, "Good." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with relief and guilt, and the particular gratitude that came from being freed from a monster you'd convinced yourself you deserved. "Logan loves you," she said finally. "I thought you should know that. He draws pictures of you at school, talks about you to his teacher, asked me last week if you were going to be his dad." Grant's breath caught. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were our friend. Someone who cares about us. Someone safe." Tessa finally looked at him, her eyes reflecting television light and 3 months of slowly lowered defenses. Was that the right answer? Grant looked down at Logan, sleeping peacefully with his bare feet tucked under a blanket. His small face relaxed in ways it never had been in the hospital corridors where they'd met. "Yeah," he said, his voice rougher than intended. That was the right answer. The movie played on. Logan slept. And Grant Mercer, who'd built an empire on violence and fear and the calculated destruction of anything that threatened his interests, sat on a couch with a woman and child who'd taught him that sometimes protection looked like spaghetti dinners and telescopes and being called safe. He'd killed monsters before, had ended threats with surgical precision and no remorse. But this was the first time he'd understood what came after the killing. The life that was possible when the monster was gone. The slowly built trust and the tentative hope and the simple act of existing without fear. This was why Logan had believed in him. Not because Grant could kill, but because Grant could protect what came after. Grant thought they were safe. He'd eliminated Dylan, relocated Tessa and Logan, created an untraceable fortress. But Dylan Pierce was about to prove that some monsters are harder to kill than others. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped under the apartment door while Tessa was at work and Logan was at school. Grant found it during one of his check-ins. He'd gotten into the habit of stopping by twice a week, ostensibly to see Logan, but really to ensure the security he'd put in place was holding. The envelope was unmarked except for Tessa, scrawled in aggressive capitals. Grant recognized the handwriting from the police reports Rhett had compiled months ago. Dylan's signature on complaint forms. Dylan's writing on his employment application. Dylan, who was supposed to be gone. Permanently. Grant opened the letter with controlled precision, his jaw tightening with each line. "You think you can just leave? You think I don't know where you are? I've been watching. I know about your new place. I know about the rich boyfriend who thinks he can protect you. I'm coming for what's mine. Soon." The threat was crude, grammatically questionable, and absolutely genuine. Grant's first extraction had failed. Dylan had found them. And this time there would be no second chances, only permanent solutions. The threat was crude, grammatically questionable, and absolutely genuine. Dylan had found them. Despite every precaution, despite the untraceable lease and the shell corporations and the doorman who'd been thoroughly instructed and well compensated, Dylan had somehow tracked them down. Grant pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Rhett. "Problem has resurfaced. Need immediate surveillance and extraction plan." Then he pocketed the letter and headed to the hospital where Tessa was finishing her shift. She knew something was wrong the moment she saw his face. Grant had never visited her at work before, had maintained careful boundaries between his interventions and her professional life. "What happened?" she asked immediately, her body already tensing with the muscle memory of crisis preparation. "Not here. Is there somewhere private?" They ended up in an empty conference room, fluorescent lights humming overhead while Tessa read the letter with hands that trembled slightly. Grant watched her transformation from the relaxed woman who made spaghetti dinners back into the hunted creature he'd first met. Shoulders curling inward, eyes scanning for exits, breath coming faster. "How did he find us?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet, but I will." Grant's voice carried the cold certainty that had made him successful in his particular line of work. "And this will be handled. You said he was gone. I said he was gone from your immediate vicinity. I didn't say he was dead." The admission hung between them. Grant had made a calculation 3 months ago. Dylan had been relocated, frightened thoroughly, given explicit instructions about consequences if he ever contacted Tessa or Logan again. It had seemed cleaner than permanent elimination. Less risk of investigation. More deniable. It had been a mistake. "He's going to kill me," Tessa said, the words flat and factual. "You don't know him. He doesn't let things go. He'll wait and he'll plan and he'll find a moment when you're not there and he'll—" "No!" Grant's voice cut through her spiral with absolute authority. "He's not going to touch you. He's not going to touch Logan. And after tonight, he's not going to be a problem ever again." Subscribe and comment where you are watching from. If this story touches your heart even a little, go ahead and subscribe. Join our family of hope and love, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because Dylan Pierce represents every abuser who refuses to let go, every predator who sees their victims as property. This is the moment when Grant stops being merciful and becomes what Logan always believed he was, a true monster killer. Tessa looked up at him, searching his face for something. Reassurance, maybe, or proof that this promise was different from the last one. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done 3 months ago." "You're going to kill him." Grant didn't confirm or deny, didn't need to. They both understood what permanent solutions looked like in his world. Logan can't lose you too, Tessa said quietly. He's already lost enough. If something happens to you because of us, nothing's going to happen to me. Grant leaned forward, holding her gaze with the intensity that made people believe him even when logic suggested otherwise. But I need you to do exactly what I say. Tonight, you pick up Logan from school. You go back to the apartment. You lock every lock. And you don't open the door for anyone except me. What if Dylan comes? He won't. He's being tracked as we speak. And if he somehow gets past my people and gets to that door... Grant pulled a small handgun from his jacket, placing it on the table between them. You use this. Center mass. Don't hesitate. Don't warn him. Just shoot. Tessa stared at the gun like it was a snake coiled to strike. I can't. I don't know how. Safety's here, Grant demonstrated. Point and pull the trigger. That's all you need to know. But you won't need to know. Because Dylan isn't getting anywhere near you. He pushed the gun across the table. After a long moment, Tessa picked it up with trembling hands, the weight of it seeming heavier than physics alone could account for. I need my phone, she said. And Logan's school number. In case... Already in your contacts. Under safe. You call that number and say, red. Someone will be at your door in 3 minutes. You say black. They'll be there in 90 seconds, but they'll be coming in ready for combat. Tessa absorbed this information, cataloging the infrastructure Grant had built around them without her knowledge. The protection that existed in shadows and backup plans. The empire of violence repurposed for safety. Why? She asked finally. Why do you care this much? Grant considered deflecting. Considered giving her the easy answer about Logan's faith or basic decency, or the moral imperative to protect the vulnerable. Instead, he told her the truth. Because 3 months ago, your brother looked at me and saw something worth believing in, and I haven't been worth believing in for a very long time. His voice carried an edge of something that might have been vulnerability if Grant were capable of such things. He gave me a reason to be better than what I am, and I'm not going to let Dylan Pierce take that away. Tessa's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. Logan asked me yesterday if you were going to be his dad. He wants to draw you a Father's Day card, even though it's not until June. The words hit Grant harder than any threat Dylan could have written. Logan wanted a father. Tessa wanted to give him that. But first, Grant had to eliminate the monster who stood between them and that future. The words hit Grant harder than any threat Dylan could have written. Father. A role he'd never considered, never prepared for, never believed himself capable of filling. What did you tell him? I told him to ask you himself. Tessa managed a weak smile. He's been working up the courage all week, Grant stood, needing movement to process emotions he wasn't equipped to handle. Tonight, you and Logan stay safe. Tomorrow, you wake up and this is over. And next week... He stopped, the promise forming before he'd fully decided to make it. Next week, Logan can give me whatever card he wants. He left before Tessa could respond, before the weight of what he'd implied could fully settle, before he had to examine too closely what it meant that he was choosing fatherhood over isolation, family over empire, protecting over destroying. The hospital corridor stretched ahead of him, fluorescent lights buzzing their endless song. Grant pulled out his phone and called Rhett. Status? Dylan's at a bar on Morrison Street. Been there for 3 hours. Planning to move him when he leaves. Take him somewhere quiet. Change of plans. I want to handle this personally. Grant! Rhett's voice carried warning. Personal means risk. Means connection. Means exposure. I know what it means. Set it up. He ended the call and kept walking. Past the elevators, past the waiting rooms, past the places where he'd first met a boy who'd asked a monster for help. Tonight, Grant would become the monster Logan believed him to be. The kind that killed other monsters. The kind that ended threats permanently so that 6-year-olds could sleep without nightmares and make Father's Day cards in October. Tomorrow, he'd figure out how to be a father. But tonight, he had a monster to kill. Dylan Pierce left the bar at 11:47 p.m., completely unaware that he had approximately 2 minutes left to live. Grant Mercer had spent his entire career eliminating threats, but this one was personal. Dylan Pierce left the bar at 11:47 p.m., stumbling slightly as he navigated the transition from warm interior to November cold. Grant watched from across the street, cataloging gait and awareness level, and the particular arrogance of a man who'd never truly faced consequences. Rhett's team had done their work. Dylan's path home was clear of witnesses, security cameras mysteriously malfunctioning. Streetlights conveniently dark. The kind of infrastructure Grant's organization could create when necessary. Dylan made it 2 blocks before Grant stepped from shadow into his path. The confrontation was brief, clinical. Grant didn't monologue, didn't explain, didn't give Dylan the satisfaction of understanding why his world was ending. He simply removed the threat with the efficiency of a man who'd done this before and would sleep soundly afterward. When it was over, Dylan Pierce no longer existed. Not physically, not in any database, not in any way that mattered. Rhett's cleanup crew would handle the rest. The body that would never be found, the missing persons report that would go nowhere, the slow bureaucratic erasure of a man who'd never mattered much to anyone except the people he'd hurt. Grant returned to his car, stripped off the gloves he'd worn, and sent a single text to Tessa. "It's done. You're safe." Then he drove to the apartment building where Tessa and Logan lived, parking across the street to maintain visual confirmation of security until morning. The doorman saw him, nodded once in acknowledgement, and returned to his post. Money bought loyalty, but consistent application of power maintained it. At 3 a.m., a light came on in the apartment. Grant's phone buzzed. "Thank you. I know what you did. I know what it cost. Thank you." He didn't respond. Some messages didn't require acknowledgement, only acceptance. At 6 a.m., Logan appeared on the balcony, small silhouette against dawn's sky, his new telescope pointed at stars that were fading with approaching sunrise. The boy stood there for 10 minutes before noticing Grant's car. Then he waved. Small, certain, trusting. Grant waved back. At 7 a.m., his phone rang. Tessa's voice was steady when she answered his hello. "Logan wants to know if you're coming up for breakfast. I made French toast." "I'll be there in 5 minutes." Grant parked in the visitor spot, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and knocked on the door that had locks that worked. Logan answered, already dressed for school, his smile bright with the particular joy of a child who'd slept through the night without fear. "You came," Logan said, as if there had been any doubt. "I came." Breakfast was quiet, comfortable, ordinary. Tessa moved through the kitchen with the ease of someone who'd finally stopped waiting for violence to erupt. Logan chattered about a science project and the spelling test he'd aced yesterday, and whether Grant would come to his school's winter concert. "I have a solo," Logan said, his pride evident. "Mrs. Henderson says I have good pitch." "I'll be there," Grant promised. After Logan left for school, Tessa and Grant were about to have a conversation that would define their future. The question wasn't whether Grant had killed Dylan, they both knew he had. The question was what they would build on that foundation. After Logan left for school, walking himself the 3 blocks now, no longer needing escort, no longer scanning for threats, Tessa poured more coffee and sat across from Grant at the table. "Dylan's gone," she said. Not a question. A confirmation. Yes. For good this time. Yes. Tessa wrapped her hands around her mug, absorbing the finality. I should feel guilty. I should be horrified that a man died because of me. But you're not. No, I'm relieved, and grateful, and free. She looked up at him with eyes that had learned to see clearly again. Does that make me a bad person? It makes you human. Grant's voice carried certainty born from years of understanding moral complexity. Monsters forfeit the right to protection when they create victims. Is that how you justify what you do? I don't justify. I accept. There are people in this world who choose to hurt, and there are people who choose to stop them. I'm the latter. Logan thinks you're a hero. Logan's 6. He doesn't understand. He understands perfectly. Tessa's voice was firm, certain, carrying the weight of 3 months watching her brother transform from hunted to safe. He understands that you saw a child who needed help and you helped him. You didn't ask for payment or gratitude or recognition. You just acted. Grant said nothing. Words felt inadequate for what was happening, for the way Tessa was looking at him like he was human instead of weapon. He wants you to be his father, she said quietly. And I want. She stopped, breathing through whatever she was feeling. I want to give him that. If you're willing. I don't know how to be a father. None of us know how to be parents until we are. You'll figure it out. Tessa reached across the table, her hand covering his. You already have been. The telescope, the school visits, the patient explanations of math homework I don't understand. That's fatherhood. Grant looked at her hand on his. At the casual intimacy that suggested safety and trust, and the possibility of something beyond the isolated existence he'd built. I'm not a good man, he said. I've done things. You've done things to people who chose violence as their path. That's different. Tessa's grip tightened. You've never hurt Logan. You've never hurt me. You've only protected us. That's what matters. The simple moral framework, protection versus destruction, choosing to help versus choosing to harm, settled somewhere in Grant's chest where the ice had been melting for months. I killed Dylan last night, he said, offering the truth because secrets between them felt wrong. Personally, not through intermediaries. Me. I know. Tessa's expression didn't change. And I'm grateful. They sat in silence, morning light streaming through windows, coffee growing cold, processing what it meant to build a family on the foundation of eliminated threats and mutual understanding of necessary violence. Logan's winter concert is December 15th, Tessa said finally. 7 p.m. If you come, people will assume. Let them assume. The other parents will ask questions about who you are, what you do. I'm Logan's father. That's what I do. The words, once spoken, felt inevitable. Grant Mercer, the man who'd built an empire on calculated violence, had just chosen fatherhood. But the real test would come 3 weeks later, when Logan would ask the question that would make it official. The words, once spoken, felt inevitable. As if the past 3 months had been leading here, to this kitchen, to this moment, to the decision to become something he'd never believed possible. Okay, Tessa said, and smiled, genuine, relieved, hopeful. Okay. Grant stayed for another hour, then left to handle the business that paid for apartments with working locks and telescopes, and the infrastructure that kept families safe. But he returned that evening, and the evening after, and the one after that. Creating patterns, building routines, learning how to be present in ways that had nothing to do with violence, and everything to do with choosing to show up. 3 weeks later, Logan did give him the Father's Day card he'd made in October. It was crayon on construction paper, featuring 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a sun that smiled down at them. Above the figures, in Logan's careful handwriting, my family. Grant kept it in his jacket pocket, next to the drawing Logan had given him months ago. Monster killer, that one said. Both were true. Both mattered. He'd killed the monster, and in doing so, he'd found a family. 6 months after Dylan disappeared, Logan drew a picture during art class that his teacher sent home with a note attached. Thought you'd want to see this. The drawing showed 3 people at a dinner table. A woman with long dark hair, a small boy with curly hair, a tall man in a dark suit. All smiling. All together. At the bottom, Logan had written, "My family, me, Tessa, and Dad." Dad, not Grant, not Tessa's boyfriend, or our friend, or any of the careful distances he'd maintained for months. Just Dad, stated simply as fact. Grant found it taped to the refrigerator when he let himself into the apartment that evening. Key they'd given him a month ago attached to a keychain Logan had made in summer camp. The domesticity of it still caught him off guard sometimes. The casual intimacy of belonging somewhere, of having people who expected his presence, of being woven into the fabric of daily life. "He wanted to surprise you," Tessa said from the kitchen, where she was chopping vegetables with the efficient competence of someone who no longer cooked under time pressure or fear. Worked on it all week during art period. "It's perfect. He asked me last night if he could call you Dad. Out loud, I mean. He's been practicing it in his room." Tessa smiled softly. "I heard him yesterday morning. Dad, can you help me with my homework? Dad, look at this cool rock I found." Just testing how it sounds. Grant touched the drawing, his finger tracing the careful crayon lines that depicted a life he'd built accidentally while trying to eliminate a threat. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to ask you himself." Logan was about to walk out of his room and ask the question that would complete their transformation from survivors to family. This moment, a 6-year-old asking permission to call a mafia boss Dad, was the culmination of everything that had started with 5 words in a hospital corridor. As if summoned, Logan appeared from his room, homework in hand, face serious with the weight of a question that had been building for months. "Grant!" He stopped, swallowed, tried again. "Dad?" The word hung in the air between them, tentative and hopeful, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. Grant had faced down rival bosses, federal prosecutors, situations where one wrong word meant death. None of it had prepared him for a 6-year-old child asking permission to call him father. "Yeah," Grant heard himself say, his voice rougher than intended. "Yeah, you can call me Dad." Logan's face transformed, joy and relief and love expressed with the pure intensity that only children managed. He launched himself at Grant, small arms wrapping tight around his waist, face pressed against expensive suit jacket. "I knew you'd say yes," Logan said, muffled against fabric. "Tessa said you would, but I wanted to make sure." Grant's arms came around the boy, holding him with the careful certainty of someone who'd learned that protection looked like this, like being present, like showing up, like promising through action rather than words. "I made you something," Logan said, pulling back to retrieve a small box from the table. "For Father's Day. I know it's not until June, but Mrs. Henderson said it's okay to give Father's Day presents whenever you want if your dad is new." Inside the box was a keychain. Simple metal with an engraved message. "World's best monster killer." Grant looked at it for a long moment, processing the full circle they'd traveled from that first night in the hospital corridor. From Logan asking a stranger for help to this moment, 6 months later, where Monster Killer had become father. "I love it," Grant said. "I'll use it every day." "I made Tessa one too. Hers says world's best sister. But she's more than that now. She's like..." Logan's face scrunched in concentration. "Like a parent, but also a friend. Is there a word for that?" "Family," Tessa said quietly. The word for that is family. They ate dinner together. Pasta that Logan had helped make, salad that Grant had brought from the Italian deli he favored, bread that was still warm from the bakery downstairs. Conversation flowed easily around topics that had become their routine. Logan's upcoming science fair project, Tessa's promotion to charge nurse, whether they should get a cat or wait until summer. After Logan went to bed, Grant and Tessa sat on the couch with wine and comfortable silence, and the particular peace that came from surviving darkness and choosing to build something better. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, Tessa admitted. For something to go wrong. For this to be too good to last. Nothing's going to go wrong. You can't promise that. No. Grant's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close with the casual intimacy that had developed gradually over months of showing up. But I can promise that whatever goes wrong, we'll handle it. Together. Tessa leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder in the same spot where Logan had slept during movies, where trust had built incrementally through small moments and consistent presence. Logan's teacher asked if you'd come speak at Career Day, she said. About what you do. What did you tell her? That you're in private security, which isn't entirely a lie. Grant laughed. Actual laughter, the kind that had been rare before this family had taught him how. I'm not sure my career is appropriate for Career Day. You could talk about pattern recognition, risk assessment, strategic planning. All true, just edited. Is this you asking me to lie to 6-year-olds about being a criminal? This is me asking you to be Logan's dad at Career Day. Tessa looked up at him with eyes that had learned to see him completely. Violence and protection, darkness and devotion, monster and father all existing simultaneously. The rest is just details. Grant kissed her forehead, the gesture familiar now, earned through months of proving he could be gentle when gentleness mattered. I'll be there. They sat together until Tessa's eyes started drooping, until the wine glasses were empty and the city lights outside had dimmed to late-night quiet. Grant walked her to her bedroom door, kissed her goodnight with the promise of more someday when she was ready, and let himself into Logan's room for the nightly check he'd started doing months ago. The boy was asleep, sprawled across his bed with the telescope manual on his pillow and his new dad keychain clutched in one hand. His face was peaceful, relaxed in ways that first drawing, the one showing Grant as monster killer, had promised but couldn't guarantee. Grant straightened the blanket, moved the manual to the nightstand, gently extracted the keychain so Logan wouldn't wake up with impressions on his palm. The boy shifted slightly but didn't wake, secure in sleep because his world was finally safe. Thank you, Grant whispered, though Logan couldn't hear him, for believing in something I didn't know I could be. He left the apartment using his key, nodding to the night doorman who'd learned months ago that Grant's presence meant safety rather than threat. His car was parked in the spot he'd been renting since Tessa and Logan moved in, close enough for rapid response, visible enough to deter anyone who might consider becoming a problem. But there were no problems anymore. Dylan was gone. Tessa was thriving. Logan was happy. And Grant Mercer, who'd built an empire on violence and fear and the systematic destruction of obstacles, had learned that the greatest power wasn't in killing monsters. It was in becoming the kind of man monsters feared. The kind who protected rather than destroyed. The kind who showed up for school concerts and career days and homework help. The kind who could be both weapon and father. Who could eliminate threats and make French toast. Who could exist in darkness and still create light for the people he loved. Logan had asked for a monster killer. Had believed Grant capable of ending the threat that had dominated his young life. But what Logan had really given Grant was permission to be something more than monster or killer. Permission to be dad. To be family. To be the steady presence that transformed survival into living. The keychain sat in Grant's pocket, next to the two drawings Logan had made, the first asking for help, the last showing what help had built. "World's best monster killer," the keychain said. Grant drove through November night toward the empire he still ran, the business that still required his particular skills, the world that still needed monsters to fight monsters. But now he had a reason beyond empire, had people to protect who saw him as father, rather than feared him as boss. Had learned that killing monsters mattered less than what you protected by killing them. He was still a monster, still a killer, still capable of the violence that had built his reputation. But he was also dad, family, safe, and that made all the difference. If you felt something while watching, please subscribe. That's how I know these stories mean something to you, even on your TV. Take a second to join our community of story lovers. Your support keeps this world of emotions alive.